Dane Moore is here. He covers the Timberwolves and hosts the Dane Moore NBA podcast. He was at Timberwolves Media Day on Monday in Minnesota, just days after the massive Karl-Anthony Towns trade. I saw some of the quotes that were going around. I know the trade isn't yet official. It wasn't official then. It's not official now as we're recording here. But what was the vibe like at Media Day?
It's like when a player like gets drafted by a team for another team and they're wearing the wrong hat, and it just doesn't really make sense. And like there could be an interview, like the interviews made no sense with like Finch and Conley. They legally can't talk about the trade until it's finalized, right? And this one seems like it's going to take extra long to finalize because it's really complicated from the Knicks perspective of sending out the money, right? And another like wonderful little gift of these aprons that they've added is just making everything tougher to execute trades and do all this. So it was a weird vibe, and then it was made weirder because the players could talk about it. So it's like Finch and Conley are like, Carl who, and then you come and then we got to talk to Rudy and Conley and a lot Edwards and a lot of the other players, and they could kind of talk about Randall. But it was weird for them to talk about it too. Like, what do you want to say? You want to be like excitedly talking about Julius Randle when this guy who's obviously a staple of the Wolves organization just kind of got nudged out the door. It was weird vibe, but we move.
Well, I want to get your reaction. This trade goes down Friday night. There was just an instant reaction going on. I just my Twitter was blowing up. It was between that and the wild ending to the Hurricanes football game. I was just like, what is going on? This is a crazy sports Friday night. But what was your sort of initial reaction when you saw that, other than shock? Like your basketball sort of reaction? Has that changed as you've gotten a chance to kind of sit here and digest with the skeleton of the deal? We basically know what the deal is.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was always a possibility and almost a certainty if you would have said 12 months ago that one of Karl-Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert, or Naz Reid won't be on the team come the start of this season, right? Like that was said often in back conversations, right? But then the Wolves have a great year, right? And they have a great year. I mean, particularly like that Denver series, they were so great because of all three of those guys, and because of all three of those guys playing in the same game, doing the similar things all together that helped slow Nikola Jokic. So you're like, all right, maybe they will just run this back again. Like Naz Reid's got another year on his contract. Obviously, Carl and Rudy are locked up. The money's the money. But the money is the money, and there is this long-term serious issue associated with, being in the second apron and being there as early as the Wolves are. And the money was going to be something that was going to need to be dealt with at some point. And I think as I'm piecing it together on Friday night and talking to people and stuff, it's like, yeah, they got a like pretty discernibly positive asset return, or however you want to say it, for a player, on the 35% Supermax 4-year, $220 million contract. I think they found a deal that was positive asset return, and also they didn't feel like made their team worse for this upcoming season. Now that's obviously, up for debate. I know a lot of Wolves fans don't feel that way. I'm still kind of wrapping my head around that and, trying to picture what does the front court of Julius Randle and Rudy Gobert look like, and all of those sort of things. So I guess I'm still processing from Friday night, but sure? That's where I'm at.
Are we sure that Julius Randle is going to start with Rudy Gobert? I would assume that is going to be the case here, at least for half the season. But, I guess the idea before this trade ever took place was that in that Karl-Anthony Towns was expendable was because you had Naz Reid, and because Naz Reid could do a lot of the kind of similar things that Karl-Anthony Towns could do. So I think on one hand, it would just seem like obvious, okay, bring Julius Randle off the bench and start Naz Reid with Rudy Gobert, although I understand that there's a lot of reasons why you can't do that. But are we sure? Are we just like in Sharpie?
We are not sure because we haven't really been able to talk about the Julius Randle part of it. That's one. But also, even just in having conversations on Friday night about it, a lot of the focus or excitement seemed to be around Dante DiVincenzo, and particularly the contract that he's on, locking him in long term on a affordable contract. Plus, they got a first round pick. Maybe that was my fault. Like, those are the things I was asking about, and those were the new things, right? Like, these are like the shinier things.
Right.
But I think they're in a perfect position to like check all the boxes and not bring Julius Randle off the bench. Start him, make him comfortable right away. Like, the Naz Reid problem isn't that Naz Reid wants to be a starter. The Naz Reid problem is Naz Reid wasn't playing enough minutes. He's
Right.
like, when Karl was here, he's playing like 22 minutes a night. Like, that dude needs to be playing more minutes. He needs to be a 30-minute a night guy. So now I see a path to, like, all right, make Randall feel comfortable starting at the 4, right? Empower him. I'd be shocked if this isn't the way they do it. And then just kind of balloon Naz's role behind, like, as backfill behind that, similar to how it was, before with Cap, but just let a little bit, maybe giving him a little bit more opportunity, letting him close more games. It was always like kind of like Karl's having a bad game, but like politically, you kind of got to let him close the game,
Right.
I would assume a lot of that stuff kind of filters, and Rudy too. Maybe Rudy doesn't close a game, and Naz needs to play well to close a game. I think that's always the more important part, right, Wes? Is like, who's closing, not who's starting.
So my first reaction was the Knicks got the better player. What a great, shocking deal for them. I'm always going to view things a little bit more from the Eastern Conference lens when something like that, when you have like this cross conference thing, just because of the team I cover. But I tried to just do this whole experiment on Saturday when I had a chance to digest with it. I'm like, let me talk myself into it for both teams, because the reaction, I was a lot of similar stuff that you were kind of talking about. It was like, yeah, was this a win for Minnesota? There's a lot of reaction like, are we sure this was a win for the Knicks? Like, this was one of the rare like lose-lose trades, depending on who you talk to. And I was like, you know what? I don't feel great about this trade for either team, so I'm just gonna like sit here and just try to talk myself into the trade for both sides, because clearly both of these front offices decided it was good enough to pull the trigger on it. What were they seeing? What were they seeing out of it? For the Knicks, we don't have to do the whole thing there, but they got the better player, right? They get Karl-Anthony Towns. They get to play 5 out. They get to go match up with the Celtics in this 5 out scheme. They do whatever they want to do. They get a center after Mitchell Robinson got hurt. It's very easy to see the Knicks and why they did it. For the Timberwolves, we talked about the financial flexibility that it was bound to happen at some point. And like you said, like, yeah, maybe on its face, like Julius Randle's maybe expiring contract, it's got that player option next year. Dante DiVincenzo in 1 first-round pick doesn't feel like a lot for an all-NBA center who spent his entire career gave his whole career to Minnesota, was so loved in the community and all these things. It doesn't feel like a lot, but like you said, he's on that 35% supermax. Trading those guys is really damn hard in today's NBA and with this new second cap, and you got a positive return out of it. This might be, in today's NBA, in this salary cap structure, just the best you can do for a guy making that much money.
Well, the one that came to my mind was like, and not that obviously the Celtics would do this, but like Jalen Brunson's on the same contract as Cap, right? Like, they're both making 50 this year, 35% of the cap. Not Jalen Brunson, sorry, Jalen Brown with the
Right.
Celtics. Like, and he just won Finals MVP.
Right.
Like, what would, if he was on the market for some reason, like the Celtics were like, we are trading Jalen Brown, that wouldn't be like some massive asset return that comes back. It's not going to be like the Gobert trade, what they got back, or what they for KD, right? Like, it's probably talking about like a couple players, good players like Dante DiVincenzo and Julius Randle, and maybe a pick or two, right? Like, that's we have to look at it through the lens of like, that dude makes 50. And in time, some of those things will catch up. But when you are a player, and I think this is a flaw of the whole system of like, you grew up and you've been on the same team, Cat and Brown both been on the Cats 10 years, Jalen Brown 9 years. Like, the team raised them, paid them when they were due. They were max players, and they just kept giving it to them. And now they're not very positive assets. That's just how it works, because how much money they can get.
And it's why, by the way, we don't have to do this whole thing, but why Brandon Ingram is having such a hard time getting his next contract.
Exactly.
Because nobody's going to want to pay that kind of player that kind of money. So even from an X's and O's perspective, I'm like, okay, well, Minnesota, I was looking at their roster. You kind of go out there. I'm like, they don't really have any shot creation, like reliable shot creation outside of Anthony Edwards. We have no idea what Rob Dillingham is going to give him as a rookie.
Dude, but they didn't last year either.
They didn't last year either, but that kind of bit them in the butt, didn't it?
Yeah.
Like,
okay, that's where you're going with it. Got it.
Right. And so I'm like, Julius Randle's a shot creator. Like that guy, you give him the ball, he could get his own shot. And Karl-Anthony Towns is an awesome scorer. He's got this like baseline production that is undeniable. But
Sure.
he's a pick and pop guy. He's tremendously efficient on offense, but like he's different than Julius Randle. Julius Randle's throw the ball into him, he can make something happen. So I'm like, okay, that is something they needed. I don't know that they needed to trade Cat to get that, but they did need, I think, that element somewhere else on the roster outside of Edwards. Dante DiVincenzo is an awesome player. Like I don't know, like he helps them solve basically all their concerns about backcourt depth. He's a reliable 3-and-D guy, proven playoff guy, been in multiple winning environments. Yep, home run on that. Great deal, like you already talked about. Done. Easy to see that. You get an asset with that Pistons first round pick. Maybe you can now package Julius Randle in that first round pick next summer or the trade deadline or whatever. You have flexibility that you didn't have before you made this deal. And we already talked about Naz Reid. You can still get to that look that you had with Towns with Naz Reid in terms of the two bigs. You have one space on the floor. You have the other one, Rudy Gobert. Obviously, he's cheaper. You get him more minutes. So we already talked about that stuff. The other takeaway I had from here too was I saw a lot of people say, "Oh, well, you built this whole team, Tim Connolly. You built this whole team to beat Denver." Was this a sign that they're like maybe the West doesn't go through Denver anymore? Right? Like we still can get to that look because we have some bigs, but we have to position ourselves to maybe beat OKC, Dallas now, and maybe we didn't feel like we were positioned to beat those guys.
I mean, I think the whole like the roster was put together to beat Denver thing is something we made up. Like, like, yeah, sure, like that would help, right? Like, what's the best way to guard Jokic? It's to put a big body on him and have a rim protector there helping. And that's what the Wolves did against them. But you know what, man? They're going to do the same thing when they play Jokic again. They're just going to have Naz or Randall guard him, and they're going to have Rudy sit there at the rim. The same. He's going to like shirk off of Aaron Gordon. It's gonna be the same thing there. So I mean,
but now you
Tim Connolly and Finch aren't they're not sleeping on Nikola Jokic. They're not sleeping on Nikola Jokic and that team being like, we got enough to.
No, but that's my point. Like you could still get to that look because you have Naz Reid.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And Randall's big. Like we shouldn't just be like, Randall's big. He can help. But
I mean, and that's really all you need, man. You like when you have Rudy behind you there, like you need like a fire hydrant that just like sits there behind. And to Cat's credit, man, and Cat wasn't moving that well in the playoffs. Like Cat he was coming back from the knee, but like Cat just took it, and was like, I'm gonna be here. I'm gonna not let Jokic do his little like roll his back on you thing like over and over again, and provide some resistance and let Rudy be there to clean it up and get the rebounds and rely on your perimeter defense. I see no reason why Julius Randle like can't at least kind of do that. And then Naz did it a lot in that series. Like you remember Game 7, you go back and watch Game 7, Karl was in and out, foul trouble. Naz was taking the primary on Jokic, and Rudy was back there. I'm curious to see the first time they played Denver, which one of them? Maybe in that game you start Naz or something. But yeah, I don't know. I think they know they need a lot more. I think they feel like they needed more perimeter stuff. Yeah,
exactly. Because now it just seemed like Denver owned the Western Conference, and now that doesn't seem like the case, right? With the Thunder, the Mavericks won the West last year. Maybe they didn't feel like they were positioned to beat those guys and also Denver. And now making this trade, I don't think this trade gets you there, but it gives you some pieces to get there within the next calendar year. And so I kind of was sitting there again on Saturday. I'm like, I think I talked myself into this from the Timberwolves perspective. It sucks. Like there is definitely a vibe. Like the vibes are not immaculate anymore right now in Minnesota. But winning helps a lot of those vibes get back to immaculate levels. But right now it's just there's an emotional part of seeing Towns walk away. But yeah, I think from a front office standpoint, from an Excel spreadsheet standpoint, this kind of positions themselves to make a deal that kind of gets them something that helps them in a matchup against OKC or Dallas, and they don't have to rush anymore. Where it felt like the clock was ticking on this build because of how expensive it was.
And there was a risk, like, McCarl starting year 1 of the Supermax. Like, what if he gets hurt again this year? Like, knock on wood, whatever. We don't want that to happen. But like, if that happens, the Knicks are in a tough spot, right? And if over the course of the 4 years, I mean, he's getting older, 7-footer, big feet, whatever. I mean, like that. If that happened to the Wolves, it could really sink the Wolves, given how many expensive contracts the Wolves have. They got Ant on a max, they got Rudy way up there. They got Jaden on one. Nas is coming. like the Knicks don't have expensive players on their team other than Karl-Anthony Towns. So I think they can absorb that risk a little bit more. Obviously, they can just absorb the contract a little bit more.
Jalen Brunson
But
taking that pay cut was huge in facilitating all
yeah,
of this. Yeah.
they don't have expensive players,
Yeah.
which is crazy for how good of a team that they are. The Wolves, it was just like you just were going to need to keep going down this path. Like you were going to be running it back, and what was going to happen is year over year, like one or two players would fall off the train. Like this year, it was like Monte Morris and Kyle Anderson, and like that doesn't seem like that much, but like now they don't have a backup point guard. Monte was solid at that, and Kyle was a huge piece actually to this team for the past couple years. And then if you would have just ran it into the next season, it would have been Naz Reid would have fell off the train and gone somewhere else, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who's only making $4 million right now and is about to get paid next summer, like he would have fell off the train. Like now you have an opportunity to like retain some of your talent, and at a lesser price, even in the aggregate than the 50 that Carl's making.
It's such a great point. And if maybe Tim Connolly, who obviously built the Nuggets, maybe learned a little bit from that. It's like, if I just give everybody these huge contracts, then you end up losing Bruce Brown, Contavious Caldwell-Pope, Jeff Green, like all these guys. It's just like,
and you need
one
Peyton
at a time.
Watson.
It doesn't feel like it's a big deal, but year over year, it kind of compounds itself, and you end up having to be like, I don't know, like is Christian Brown ready in year 2 to be a really like, and so no, that's a great point that you made there. Before I let you go here, 2 other points here.
Can I just say one thing to your? I think it was a really good point on the shot creation part, and I think that's the thing that everybody's going to sleep on this whole deal is that this team has been starving for shot creation. Finch calls it somebody who can break the paint and just kind of get there and get to the middle of the floor and be a bucket getter. Like they have had nothing in that realm, and they have desperately tried to find it. Like 2 years ago, it was Jalen Noel. They were giving him a ton of minutes. Like probably a lot of people listening to this don't even know who Jalen Noel is. Like he's out of the league, but it was
I had a sweet spot for Jalen Noel.
Yeah,
I like gunner players like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was like that theoretical, like gunner package, like get into the lane and like get to his floater, get to his shot. Like he could heat up, but they really gave him an opportunity that first year of Gobert and it did not work. He wasn't effective in it. They bring in Shake Milton again last season to kind of be that sort of thing. And it just, the talent level of both Shake and Jalen just wasn't enough to be there. And Finch has repeatedly talked about needing that. And that's why I thought the Dillingham draft pick was so big, that going out to get that, because he's 19, whatever, all the questions there. But in theory, right, when he plays well, he's going to be that break the paint, like split 2 defenders, get to the middle floor, go get his. And Julius Randle will too. That was where this team sucked at offense last year. Like people think the Wolves had an awesome season last year. Like they were trying, not tanking all the time. And they were 17th on offense. And there is bad teams who had better offenses than them last season. They needed to address offense, and they needed to address it, I think, in a different way than they were addressing it with Carl's floor spacing. That Karl can shoot, and like Knicks fans need to know, like Karl can shoot the crap out of it, but Knicks fans need to understand he doesn't shoot that many. He just doesn't shoot that many, and his preference is to pump and go. And I don't know, maybe at the 5 and they spread it out more, and Tibbs gets the whip out and is like, no, you're shooting 9 of these a game. I don't know. Finch has been trying to do that for 2 or 3 years, and Karl is a hell of a shooter, the best 2 7 feet tall in the league, but he shoots like 5 a game.
Right.
It's just that they're not losing that much in terms of floors. DiVincenzo shot more than him last year.
Yep.
Shot him at the same clip. It's a little bit different positionally, but like the Wolves needed offense. They weren't getting it from the Ant and Cat pairing or a Rudy spread pick and roll type of game. And I think you will see a more spread 4-out Rudy moving from the dunker and find dunker to dunker and finding more ways to penetrate and kick and navigate spacing through that. I mean, there's going to be issues surrounding it, but this team was a rough watch on offense before. And I know now people are making all the jokes about Julius Randle and Ant's going to be chilling over there waiting for the ball. Like, sure, I bet you that happens sometimes this season and it's going to be frustrating, but there was a lot of pre-existing frustration offensively with the team.
You could stagger their minutes too, which is what I guess they will probably do, because as bad as that offense was, even when Anthony Edwards was in the game, it was way worse when he wasn't in the game.
Yeah.
And so it feels like you might need one of those guys on the court, and you can get to different rotations, and then that way Anthony Edwards is playing with that more familiar Naz Reid plus Rudy Gobert look, maybe sometimes after you get past the first 5 or 6 minutes, etc. And
Get
then
Julius back in at the start of the second quarter,
exactly.
fourth quarter. I think that's what they definitely should do.
Last week I had Keith Smith from Spa Track on. We were talking about teams with closing championship windows, contenders with closing championship windows. Obviously, Minnesota was in that, and I was kind of doing the work on it, and I was sort of surprised when I put them in my Indiana Jones tier in terms of like that door is like you got a foot, it is closing. I'm like, yeah, I have them in the same tier as Milwaukee and Phoenix. It kind of feels just because of this is it, and not like Anthony Edwards' last chance. That's not what I'm saying, but like this team, the way that it's constructed, this is kind of it. Like it was last year and this year, and by making this trade, they extended the window. It's wide open now. That window is fully on Anthony Edwards' timeline. As long as they end
I
up
asked
getting
Finch
that
about
Caplex,
that.
yeah.
I asked Finch about it yesterday. So Chris Finch, Wolves coach, he was in Houston with the James Harden Rockets, right? And then he was in New Orleans with the Anthony Davis Pelicans. And like both of those teams were like trying to do the win now and the win later sort of thing. Like normally, right? When I'm sure you and Keith were talking about it, it's like it's normally you're on one side of that or the other.
Right.
And I asked Finch, like, what does he learn from like kind of that experience in New Orleans and Houston with it? And what he said is like it's important to just keep it as one timeline. And it is the Ant timeline. And it is, but to your point, like there are going to be different iterations of the team around. I actually think we kind of know what that's going to be over the next 5 years. It's just like Rudy and Mike at that, and maybe Julius Randle at the end of this, maybe end of their, I mean, in Mike's case, the end of his career. And then it's going to kind of filter through that into like Ant plus Naz Reid, Jaden McDaniels, Rob Dillingham, and some of the other young guys. But the point is that they are building intentionally to not have a dip.
Right.
So I think you're right, but I also think you're wrong. You know what I'm saying? Like, because it is Ant. Ant should be a through line here. But in the Rudy Gobert and the Mike Conley portion of it, yeah, like Mike's 37.
Yeah.
And Mike is so important to this team. So important to this team. And then who knows with Rudy too? Like he's not getting any younger. So yeah, I think they're in the Indiana Jones tier, and then whatever the opposite of that is too. I think they're there as well.
They might be on both. Well, I really appreciate it. Anything from Anthony Edwards is anything entertaining that Anthony Edwards said before I let you get out of here?
Yeah, I mean it's always I don't know. He felt kind of weird about like talking about Cat, Cat not being there, and it's how it gets. Now it's like to the point where everybody's like just trying to tee him up to like say something cute too much. You know what I'm saying? And like he knows that now, and it's
right.
But I think there will be plenty. I think him and Dillingham as like a pair. What's just gonna be cool about this team? It's like this team is so much more going to be a reflection of Ant and Ant as a leader. When he came in and he was, I mean, it sounds crazy, but like he hasn't been like the guy really of this team. I know it seems like that if you just parachuted in and watch the Wolves like in the playoffs the last couple of years, but Ant's kind of been like a good soldier, and he's got a big gun, but like, now it's like clearly he's in front. And that was my biggest takeaway from media day yesterday of like, okay, like, I mean, Naz Reid is the longest tenured Timberwolf, and Ant is the second longest tenured Timberwolf. Isn't that crazy?
That's wild. He just got here. Like into the league. Yeah, that's
I know.
Absolutely wild.
Yeah.
Appreciate the time, man. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah. No problem. We'll do it again soon.